Again, it makes me, hi everybody, it's the Tatiana show and I'm ready to kill Josh. He's messing with me. And you guys caught me being all upset. I don't know why he's trying to bust my buttons, because it's February 20th. I was in a perfectly good mood. And you know, when you do one of these shows from home, right, or wherever you are in the world, which admittedly is very difficult, and you're trying to bring together multiple people through the magic of the internet, you know, it doesn't always work perfectly. And there's nothing more frustrating than internet where it's like, can you hear me now? Wait, but, and then, so Josh thinks it's hilarious to bust my buttons. I think that sounds way more ladylike than bust my balls.
Yeah, bust my buttons.
Yeah, actually, I'm gonna incorporate. So I've been trying to curse less, and I don't want to say the F word, so I'll say fudge that, and it's got some positive impact because everybody likes fudge. It still has the hardness of the F vowel with the It's very expressive.
Your vocabulary will just grow 1 billion times by cutting out the F word.
Yeah, I don't know. I think I'm just like changing it to one word that I already know. So I don't know if I'm growing the vocab, but either way, it's a lot nicer. How are you doing, Josh? What's going on?
I'm doing good. We have just conferences like mad, going around giving speeches about asset-based money and digital asset-based money and decentralized money and all the good stuff. You know, what the difference is between debt-based. You know, all these greedy people are in Bitcoin now. You know, they're all running in. All the greed, all the normie greed is rushing in.
I'm so glad you reminded me. That's so nice of you. You didn't even realize what you just did. So,
and no one gives a hell about the money stuff anymore. So that's why, I give talks about the differences between debt-based and asset-based money. I think it's an important topic.
So I've decided that as the crypto space has grown, and apparently, you know, I'm an OG now, I've decided I'm going to start calling people out. And I never got to do that before because I had no power and I was just a little peon. But now I have a little bit of power. And I'd like to say it's really hard to pick out which conferences to do because there's so many different conferences. And there's a conference that I went to in Poland by this guy, David KUCR, and then it's spelled DAVIDKUSTRA. And basically my clients, they gave money for a sponsorship. They were never listed on the website. They were never given a speaking slot, even though there was a written record of all of that stuff, submitting the logo, all that. And then when I got there, they didn't let me perform. So I think it's incumbent to let people know that when there's scammer type conferences. So, you know, it's my opinion, but cryptocurrencyworldexpo.com, that's the name of the website. They're doing it in Berlin, I think toward the end of March. March 21st.
That's where I live. How can they sabotage my city? No, the thing is that there was a whole conference in London that all these sponsors pay for with money. So it is weird. It's like conference scam. The scamming's gone to a whole new level.
From now on. And I was all excited because, you know, I love Poland and I'm biased for the Polish. I'm pro Poland. And I couldn't support that conference and it was a total waste because I went there for no reason. But anyway, it was still fun. Anyway, that's enough of that. I feel like that was the negativity, but now we're ready for the positivity because we're changing the world with cryptocurrency and all these awesome guests. Today, we've got Micha Benoliel, which is like the worst friend. Hi, Micha. Sorry for my butchering of your beautiful name. Can you say it for me so I can get a little better at my French pronunciation?
Sure. Micha Benoliel.
Micha Benoliel. Yeah, that's nice. Do you like introducing yourself with that? Is it like...
Sure. I can tell a bit about myself, yeah. So I'm a big fan of crypto, decentralized system. My first experience in decentralized system was dates from... back in 2004, when I had a small telco back in France, and no telco wanted to work with Skype at that time, and I was lucky to be the one to open up Skype in and Skype out for Skype. So enabling to landlines and mobile phones. It was a lot of fun.
Wow.
And I was back into this when I arrived in the US back in 2011 and founded a company called Open Garden. And we wanted to build peer-to-peer mesh networks. And what happened is everyone was asking for a messaging app that could work without internet by connecting smartphones to one another. And people who were asking that was for Burning Man.
So Fire chat.
Exactly. So we built FireChat for Burning Man. And what happened is that FireChat got used not only at Burning Man, but during many music festivals and during all these political events. So the biggest one was during the Hong Kong Umbrella Revolution back in September, October 2014, when 500,000 people installed the app to stay connected and organized the Umbrella Revolution. I was just by pure serendipity landing in Hong Kong when it happened. So I spent 10 days in the city of Hong Kong in the middle of the protest. Didn't sleep for 10 days trying to help the students. And it was because we were getting a lot of attack and also scam on the app itself. So we had to figure out how to sort things out so the app could keep on operating efficiently. And it was amazing. It basically transformed my perception of digital tools and what you can build and how people can use it to stay free, basically, and free to communicate and express themselves, free to organize whatever they want. And I kept that deep in my heart, even if I left Open Garden a bit more than 2 years ago. So the company I founded 7 years ago and who built FireChat. And I always wanted to build new tools that would basically help freedom of speech and access to information, because my dream as a kid was always to connect everyone to the internet for free. And every of my projects is going in that direction.
It really is. Tatiana, how do you get such top shelf talent to come on your show? It really, I mean, all these projects are things that I've played with over the years. I mean, I remember Open Garden from like 7-8 years ago. I'm not sure when you guys launched, but amazing project, absolutely amazing. And then FireChat, I think was FireChat also used a lot during the Arab Spring? Was that before?
No, it was after, but it was used in some countries in the Middle East also.
Yeah.
So if I wanted to connect to something like that, I would just so I'm not the most technical person in the world. And I think some of our listeners aren't necessarily. So what would a person do when they're regularly linked up to Wi-Fi? They would hit Open Garden. And then, because, what if one person isn't originating with, you know what I mean? Like, are they all just sort of chaining to the internet from one house? Or how is that working? How does that work exactly? How do I get internet in the middle of nowhere?
So we built the FireChat app in a way that you don't need to have any technical knowledge. So it's just like a traditional messaging app. So you use it as if you were using WhatsApp or Messenger. The difference is if you don't have internet access, then your message start to be broadcasted around you from your phone to other phones around you. And you start also to receive messages from these other phones around you if they have FireChat. So you can keep on participating in group chats. And you can keep on sending and receiving messages from people you are communicating on a one-to-one basis. All the messages are encrypted, so when they go onto other people's phone, basically only the receiver is able to read your message. And so it works completely in an offline fashion. So if no one is connected to the internet, you can still have a minimum way of exchanging information with people around you. And when there's someone connecting to the internet first, then that person will release the messages that are supposed to go and reach people on the other side of the planet, for example.
Wow.
So it's
that's how the internet should be. In my mind, that's how the topology of the internet should be. Pure mesh network all the way.
Well, it's a combination of mesh network and what we call also delay tolerant networks, because sometimes you can be in proximity with someone and not necessarily have a direct connections or access to other people. But if your messages can be relayed by that person to the next person or to the internet at some point, you can still have a way to send communications or receive communications.
Why would governments, how can they shut this down? Is it possible? Because obviously sometimes it's beneficial for, somewhere, I don't know, like North Korea. We're going to be talking with Scott Horton later. He's going to be talking about there, can they utilize this there? What happens in regions where it's restricted?
So the fact that the network is a self-healing network and that it works also in proximity when there is no internet makes it very difficult for government to trace the messages, very difficult to shut this kind of network if you have the density, because the requirement is you need enough people with the app around you so you can create a network on the fly and be able to exchange communications. Right. In the case of North Korea, I mean, North Korea is a hot topic because they do so much to prevent any form of digital communications. They control the operating system. They control access to the internet. I mean, so it makes it very difficult because people there have devices that have a specific operating system that's basically built by the government that's able to track anything that you do. Even if you send or share images or anything, then you have a tracking number that gets attached to these images to know the source, who share it with whom. I mean, it's a real tool for spying on citizens, what's happening there.
So the encryption wouldn't protect them, but it would on a regular Android phone or a Google phone in the United States. I mean, the US has a very highly sophisticated spying apparatus, but would things on this be secure from that, or no? Is it because the operating system from North Korea is already the infrastructure is so different from the rest of the world that makes it more susceptible to government intervention?
What happens is they record everything that you do on your device. Mm-hmm. So unless you have a device that's free from this operating system, which is possible, and there are probably a few devices there, but not, I guess, not enough, and not. So it's hard to actually have a community. Yeah.
But I mean, it's the beginning of this stuff, right? I mean, people are they're gonna take this and they're gonna learn from it and they're gonna make improvements. And I mean, even if it doesn't help in North Korea, it helps in so many other places. I think it's so cool. I really like it a lot.
Well, absolutely. I think it's every time you have new waves of technologies, it takes some time for people to adapt, to understand. And after people start to build, because they understand how it works. I mean, I think it's what's happening today with crypto, and the fact that we are democratizing access to cryptographic systems. It's also enabling, I mean, many different applications that we didn't think were possible before. So and I mean, I can tell you one of the projects I'm working now, which basically, because I really like what a messaging app can enable. And so I'm working with a team of fantastic people on a project called SkyBlue network. And we are building a fully decentralized messaging app, but the goal is to tie messaging and micropayments, because we believe that when you have freedom of communications linked to freedom of payment, then you can enable fantastic things and things which are could seem very basic, but are very important according to me. So when you build first a system in a decentralized manner, and I'm not talking about peer-to-peer mesh of the grid communications, I'm just talking purely when you are connected to the internet. If you build things in a fully decentralized manner, then you can still have chat rooms operating, even if government wants to shut down access to these chat rooms. For example, I don't know if you followed probably Joshua, you saw what happened during the revolution at the beginning of the year in Iran with Telegram. But basically, Telegram shut down chat rooms, and after the government shut down Telegram, if a messaging app had decentralized capabilities within it, basically that wouldn't be possible today. So we need a tool like that enables that.
Yes.
And if you tie this kind of tools to sending a message or sending payment as easy as sending a message, you can enable, fantastic things for people around the globe. You can start to connect and help people who are normally unbanked. You can have a student basically building a chat room to collect money for his tuition, all doing that using a smart contract. So it enables possibilities of collecting and moving money in a new fashion. So that's what we are building with SkyBlue now.
That's really cool, Micha.
Yeah, I'm digging all of this. So how come, this is somewhat, it seems to the normal person, it's a great idea. This is so awesome. I feel like governments would think of this as something subversive, even though the platform itself is decentralized. Don't people who are working on this stuff, especially in a public way, they know, with a really overreaching tyrannical government, if they start really going off the rails, isn't that something that developers get in trouble for, or could? If we started going really the wrong direction, is that something that you're concerned about? And overall, are people that are trying to build these kinds of things, for example, Cody Wilson in the US, he made the Ghost Gunner, he's getting in trouble for that. Do you have concerns about that type of thing?
I think you are right. I don't have concerns because I think what we are building and what we are trying to do is mainly to do good. Mm-hmm. So I think as long as you want to do good and you remain aligned with your vision, then you shouldn't be worried about anything you do. You just should make it happen and make everything possible to make it happen. And then I think there's something bigger which is happening because with technologies of decentralization is, look at the success of Bitcoin. Bitcoin is a system that's fully independent and autonomous, and what we want to build with SkyBlue is really something that also becomes completely independent and autonomous. So at some point, it's basically nodes and servers could be operated by people who just want to participate into the network, and the founders or the developers who work on the project don't need to actually hold the key. At some point, when the network reaches a certain point, you can just basically leave it have a life of its own. And Bitcoin has something like 11,000 people contributing to the nodes, and some of them not to make money, just because they want
believe.
They believe.
So how is this something like IRC or some of these really base level messaging protocols? How is that different? And second question, do you still need to go through standard ISPs, or is it incorporating some of the features of FireChat of being ISP independent, but then having these nodes that plug to the actual internet?
So it's a very different architecture from what we did at FireChat. It's really enable nodes on the internet. We're not talking about offline off-grid communications. It's really on the internet.
Yeah.
The difference.
Fully encrypted.
Yeah, exactly. The difference is when you have a lot of nodes that are decentralized, and ultimately we would like to push the architecture at the edge, so on people's smartphones, and that's going to take time. Then it becomes very difficult to actually control or figure out what's happening, because everyone with a smartphone at some point will be a node, a server, and a client, and be able to host conversations for others, but also communicate. So so you are dependent on ISPs for the last mile, because you still need an access to the internet.
And with the chat function being tied to micropayments, the original notion behind Adam Back's Hashcash was to stop spam. Is that also something that you're thinking about, is the ability to maybe charge to receive or some sort of stamping cost, even if it's micro, to put some sort of cost to spam? Because it just drives me insane, spam.
Well, it's a good question. Many of the projects who are actually trying to do messaging are introducing that notion when it is linked to a micropayment. I believe if it's not perceived by the user, then it could make sense. But you want your messaging app to gain the maximum adoption, to be as easy to use as any other messaging app. Otherwise, there's no chance that this is going to scale. And so user experience is key when you build these things. It's a very competitive sector. If you look at all the messaging platforms, so you need to build something that doesn't make it more difficult to use. Otherwise,
and it's extremely sticky. Like, messaging apps, once people have got their network of friends, and geez, I don't know about you, Tatiana, but how many messages apps have you got? Like, I've got,
I'm
Telegram.
So sick of them all. I have literally 8 applications open, and my peer people are like, you can't have all those apps open. I'm like, what do you want me to do? A real drag.
But how do you find, what's your approach to enabling people to jump away from that network, or trying to incentivize getting people to grab their network from one place like Telegram and move it across to something like SkyBlue?
So if I have the answer and I was sure of it, I would tell you. It's a tough thing to make happen. I think we will have to go through many iterations. We have some good ideas on how to make that happen, but I think we'll go through a process of iterations, and we will see what sticks, basically.
Awesome. Tatiana, are you ready to ditch all your apps and jump into SkyBlue?
I like all this stuff. Can I get this can I do any of this stuff on my iPhone?
You will be able to do it on your iPhone, yes, definitely.
How soon? I don't want to wait. Well, I'm ready now.
we are just starting the project, so it's going to take at least 4 to 6 months, I guess, before you see something. Yeah.
So are you ICOing? How's this thing funded?
Good question.
It's a good question. Well, we try to build things with a certain certainty. So today, the world of ICO is a bit, I think, in a transition. So we are waiting to see how these things basically settle. To
man,
decide.
We're the same here at Voltura. It's like we don't want to be put in that same group of scammy ICOs. So we're like, we'll hold off for a bit.
Exactly. So we mainly look at people who believe in what we want to build and share the same vision. So that's what we are doing.
But I mean, saying that, I think ICOs where big names like yourselves who've got a track record of building cool shit, people are ready to jump on board and because you've delivered. I mean, I went through the Techstars thing, and one of the things I remember from them was, look, what's the difference between a con artist and an entrepreneur? They've both got stories, they've both got nothing. The actual difference is that one's got the actual will to pull through with the thing, and the other, the scammer doesn't. And so so it's backing someone who's already built amazing stuff like yourself is a no-brainer.
Yeah, I mean, I'm passionate by what I build, and I find people. I'm lucky to have people around working with me who share the same passion, and also lucky to meet people who want to invest in this project. So that's pretty cool. And but to come back on the ICOs, I give you another project I'm working on, which is much more advanced, called Nodle. It's NODLE.io, which is basically we leverage smartphones what I call the smartphone infrastructure, what we did in the past with FireChat, and we built that crowdsourced network to lower the cost of connectivity, so manufacturers can connect their device at a very, very low cost to the internet. So it's going to be a global network, and people will be able to connect objects for a few cents a month to the internet. And we looked a lot into actually introducing a blockchain and building a fully decentralized infrastructure again here. Mm. And I mean, we are facing problems of scalability that I'm sure we are not the only one to face today when it comes to implementing for real a use of the blockchain technology.
Yeah. Have you looked at Skycoin? Because it's SkyBlue. So Skycoin's also looking at hardware. Like I think it was a very early Bitcoin adopter. He's looking at decentralized DNS using hardware modules as miners to like proof of bandwidth or something. He's got some proof of work, which is really interesting.
So I was just connected with one of the founders. Last week, and but we have to continue our conversation. So.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah, awesome. Wow, that's it's Tatiana, like I said, amazing guests.
I feel inspired. We should have had him go after Scott, because I think that Scott's really going to bring us down a little bit. But it sort of brings home the reason why we need the kinds of innovations that Micha and his team and all these other super smart I don't know, I guess freedom fighters. I don't know what else to call people. Sometimes when I was younger, now tech is very new to me. And before, you think tech, oh, it's so weird, I don't like it. But these are the real freedom fighters in the world. So I think that's really rock and roll. Thank you, Micha, very much for joining us. Right before we let you jump off, where should people connect with you? What's the best way for them to find you?
Well, I have a Twitter account, which is my username is Antenor, ANTHENOR. So that's a good way to connect with me. Or if they want, also my email is Micha, MICHA at SkyBlue with no E.network.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much for making the time to join us today. And we hope to find out more when things launch, and we'll be sure to kind of be retweeting and sharing your latest progress. So thank you for joining us today.
Well, thank you, Tatiana.
Thank you. Bye now.
Take care. Bye.
Thanks, Micha. Ciao.
Bye.
That was really good, Josh.
Wow, there you go.
Yeah, I like that. I feel inspired. Like the world is going to do something positive, and it's not all bad. Really quick, before we bring on... Sorry, go ahead.
I just was going to say, this is what I love about the crypto world. Years ago, like you said with technology, years ago, you'd hear all the problems. Like you'd hear, I don't know, everyone in libertarians say this and corruption, and you're just going insane with all these problems of the world. And what I really love about technologists, especially in the crypto scene, where they come from that anarchist libertarian sort of, there's some seeds in a lot of that. They really come out with technology that solves some of these problems. And it's just such a sigh of relief, isn't it?
Yeah, there's not a lot of depressed people here. And I think it's because we have, a distinct sense of purpose. Before we go on to our next guest, I'm super excited to have Scott Horton on. I just want to give a shout out to some of our sponsors. Oh gosh, I was like, thebitcoincpa.com. Talk to Kirk Phillips.
What a guy.
Tax season is upon you. Don't leave it till the last minute. He has been making things clean in my books for quite a while now. We're almost done. It's going to be glorious.
Oh, fantastic. Yeah, if you use Coinbase, they've been, they're getting hammered by the IRS. Go see Scott. It's really important, isn't it?
What do you mean, Scott? Scott's with us. You said Kirk. You meant Kirk.
Sorry,
anyway,
Kirk.
And then
Kirk.
Also, guys, make sure you check out Crypto Compare. Those guys are neat. You can get all your crypto information and stuff. So, I don't know. Let's move it on along because I want to, we got a lot of guests today. We got a lot of material to get through. So, Scott, my friend, my fellow warrior, what awesomeness have you been up to lately in the fight against the endless war machine? Welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks. Oh, same old thing. I just interview people who write good stuff, mostly.
So give us we'll jump right in then. Well, hold on. Okay, Scott, tell people, what do you do? You've got an anti-war radio thing. You've got it on multiple channels. You're in Austin. You've got Fool's Errand, your book. So really quick, before we dive right into the latest news and what you think is important for people to get familiar with, a little quick background on what the stuff that is that you're working on.
Sure. Okay. So my website is scotthorton.org. So I have, that's the archives of my different shows going back. I'm on KPFK in Los Angeles on Sunday mornings, and then I just interview people all week long for the podcast. I'm the opinion editor of antiwar.com, which means I choose all the viewpoints at antiwar.com. And then, I wrote a book, as you said, Fool's Errand, Time to End the War in Afghanistan, which everybody seems to really like to spend $20 on. So
I'm glad that that's working out. I also have a signed copy here at home. I haven't had a chance to read it, but I look forward to eventually having time to do anything at all. And the nice thing about having my own podcast is I get to bring you on and talk to you about things firsthand. But the last time that we were here, we talked a lot about the situation in the Middle East. Now we've got all this stuff going on with Korea. And I always feel like there's some sort of boogeyman waiting underneath the blanket or whatever, the bed, lurking and hoping to have another invasion somewhere else. So what do we need to be thinking about right now if we want to be educated citizens that are passionate about ending worldwide aggression?
Well, so on the Korea thing, I mean, the thing to keep in mind is because it's a crappy communist country, it's one of the poorest countries in the world. And America, of course, is the richest and most powerful country in the world. So anyone who says that, they threaten us in any kind of existential fashion, I mean, obviously they're just fooling you. Although the thing of it is, at this point now, they do have intercontinental ballistic missiles and they do have nuclear weapons. Now, whether they have nuclear weapons that are small enough to put on an intercontinental ballistic missile is still anyone's guess. But at this point, they have basically achieve the ability to defend themselves ultimately by threatening American cities in retaliation. Whereas before, war with them has really always been off the table anyway, because war with them would mean that they could just decimate Seoul and hundreds of thousands or possibly even millions of South Koreans would be killed, even in a short war. Basically, they have so many rockets and artillery right on the DMZ. And Seoul, the capital of South Korea, and the greater metropolitan area, there's millions of people right there within artillery range. So, already it would be a just a regular conventional war on the peninsula. There would be an absolute horror show. As our current Secretary of Defense, James Mattis, has said, it would be the worst fighting of our lifetimes. So he's, at least including Vietnam. Maybe he means the previous Korean War. I doubt he's really referring to World War II there, but he's basically saying this would be the worst war in the post-World War II era that we'd faced.
Yeah, and China would step in as well, which would make it horrendous. I'd like to step back a bit because a lot of people talk about Korea and look at them, look how freaky they are. There's no one in the streets. There's hardly any shot. And they kind of, they really make it look weird in the Western media. Now, I would like to just find out why that is. Why are they so intense and strange over there? Where did it start? How did the wars of the past, and how many people died in those wars, and what sort of psychological damage was put onto those people to become what they are now? I mean, it's kind of weird over there.
Well, I mean, there's a lot to that. I mean, first of all, it is a brutal family dictatorship. You know, it was the grandfather, then the father, and now the grandson. And it's a totalitarian country. It's not even just an authoritarian country. It's absolute rule by the state there, and absolute property ownership of everything and all that. Or, well, I don't know, absolute, but only within whatever limits they've decided. You know, there's nothing like liberty anywhere, you know, in North Korea at all. And yet, you know, it's so to go back to the history of that, if you want to, you know, talk about how much of that is America's fault, well, you know, Truman started a war there, Truman and Syngman Rhee. And, you know, the official history says that the North Koreans started it, but that's really not true. And there's a great article called Who Really Started the Korean War by Justin Raimondo, where he shows that the American-backed Southern regime, which were basically the Vichy puppets of the Japanese during the Japanese occupation during World War II, that the Americans inherited them and backed them up. And then they were doing cross-border provocation attacks in order to get the North to respond. And then once they did, they pretended that that was aggression. And they launched a United Nations war there, you know, the Korean War under Harry Truman. It was the first war, at least anything like that size, where they didn't declare war. Harry Truman said that the UN Charter overrode Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution, and that he had all the authority he needed to start a war himself. And then, yeah, the Americans, you know, basically firebombed the entire north of the country to the ground with napalm. They killed, you know, a quarter of the people, a quarter of the population of the country or something.
A quarter of the people?
Genocide.
Wow. Man, that's insane, isn't it?
Approximately 2 or 3 million, I guess, somewhere in there. It's just like Vietnam. And then we've had them under total blockade and, you know, nuclear weapons. We have no peace treaty to end the war. We have still only a ceasefire, no armistice from the end of the Korean War way back then. And we constantly have 35,000, although it fluctuates, but somewhere around there, 35,000 troops in the country to, you know, to serve as a tripwire in any conflict, so that it would immediately become America's war. And unlike any other place in the world, if there is a war between North Korea and South Korea, the entire South Korean army, according to the deal, is under the command of U.S. forces. They cede their entire army to us. Now, as Doug Bandow points out constantly, the South Korean economy, because it is a capitalist economy and not a libertarian one, but a right-wing one, they have, I don't even know, maybe I forget the numbers, but it's probably 25 times the economy of the North, or better than that. And they have a much stronger military. And here the South Koreans are screwing around trying to build a blue water navy because they can afford to build a navy to go sailing around because the Americans are picking up their dime and picking up their defense costs. And of course, then we create that moral hazard, which, you know, right now it's not playing out this way, but we do create a moral hazard where the South Koreans can afford to be much tougher than they really are because the Americans have their back. And so the Trump administration's policy is that we won't talk to you until you agree to give up everything first. And this is, of course, you know, the offer that cannot possibly be accepted. And it's made to be that way. And I don't really know what they think they're doing. I mean, as you pointed out, China is right there. Well, Russia is too. I mean, North Korea is basically between China and Russia right there. Yeah. So, you know, at all costs, this thing should be resolved diplomatically. But, you know, it was more than anything, it was George W. Bush and his government that created this crisis. Because when the old man died, when the grandfather died in 1994, and Kim Jong-il started threatening to withdraw from the Non-Proliferation Treaty, Bill Clinton cut a deal with him. And we'll give you some welfare. We'll give you some light water reactors, which means that the waste product is not useful for nuclear weapons, like a heavy water reactor is, waste is. And we'll give you some fuel oil, and you agree to stay within the Non-Proliferation Treaty and your safeguards agreement with the IAEA and don't make nuclear bombs. And that was working. And in fact, the Americans never lived up to their end of the deal. They gave them a little bit of money and a little bit of fuel oil, I think, once. And then Newt Gingrich and the Republicans in Congress stopped Bill Clinton's even ability to live up to his end of the agreement. And yet they still stayed within theirs, even though we never gave them the light water reactors. I think Donald Rumsfeld's company still got the money for the contract to build the light water reactors, but they never did it. And then when Bush Jr. came in, they, immediately started picking a fight with North Korea. And Gareth Porter just has this great article that just came out on TruthDig about a month ago. It's called How Cheney and His Allies Created the North Korean Nuclear Crisis, something like that. And he just goes through and he shows step by step by step everything they did, including announcing they were withdrawing from the agreed framework, putting new sanctions on the North Koreans, declaring the right to seize their ships on the high seas, and basically calling them an outlaw state, putting them on the axis of evil. And then also when they put out their nuclear posture review, they had the North Koreans listed as a country that was on the list for possible nuclear first strike. And only then did the North Koreans finally withdraw, Kim Jong-il withdraw from the non-proliferation treaty, kick the IAEA inspectors out of his country, restart his heavy water reactor that the Soviet Union had built for him, and begin harvesting that plutonium to make nuclear weapons. So it's all George Bush's fault. I mean, the much shorter version of that is How Bush Pushed North Korea to Nukes by Gordon Prather at antiwar.com. But the best version is Gareth Porter at truthout.org, How Cheney and His Allies. And the motive is they would rather have a rogue state with nukes and missiles that they can use as a foil to sell missile defense, boondoggle, welfare for military industrial complex firms, when all they really have to do is just send Dennis Rodman over there and just make friends. All they have to do is just promise not to invade. We have a security guarantee to Cuba, right? John F. Kennedy promised we'll never invade Cuba. No matter how long Castro lives, we won't invade. And that's the deal. That's all we have to do for the North Koreans. Right now, they have even said, we will never negotiate the nuclear issue until the Americans stop threatening and practicing invading our country twice a year the way you do. So in other words, and I'm not saying take them at their word, but what they're saying there at least is that they're willing to negotiate even the nuclear issue if we would stop practicing invading their country, if our country would deal with them in good faith. And of course, Barack Obama, I don't mean to let him off the hook. He's, did absolutely nothing to help resolve this crisis the whole time and continued to threaten them. When Donald Trump says, I'll completely obliterate North Korea if they ever do anything, Obama used the exact same kind of language and helped, ratchet the crisis up this much worse. So now we're at the point here in the future in 2018 where now conceivably they could deliver an A bomb, probably not an H bomb, but at least an atom bomb to New York or DC. And so now you would think they would say, okay, well, you got us. Now let's negotiate, but they still won't. They still say negotiation means you completely capitulate and then we'll meet you at the table.
But how much of that is propaganda? I mean, how much is that truth? How can we determine that as truth? I'm always so skeptical when I hear that they have nukes ready to go.
Oh, I think if you ask the experts, they'll say that nobody really knows how deliverable their nukes are. I mean, The thing is about making a nuke that you can fit on a missile is you've got to, quote, miniaturize it in order to get it to work. And so it may well be that they could deliver an H-bomb in a civilian airliner if they had one of those, or on the back of a flatbed truck if they could just drive across to Seoul. It may not be the case that they can deliver a nuke to North America. I mean, that's a very good point. But I think, the warmongers might gloss over it, but the experts will tell you they just don't know. Nobody really knows. Their first 3 nuclear tests were fizzles. And then after that, meaning like partial explosions, but not real successes. But then they've had, I think, 3 more tests after that they buried so deeply underground that the intelligence on them is just not clear at all of whether they were, they've claimed that they set off a hydrogen bomb, a fusion bomb, although some, it's doubtful, but nobody really knows. It could have been a boosted atom bomb.
Yeah, it can also be all show pony stuff, like, oh, look how dangerous we are.
It is 1940s technology, ultimately, to create that critical mass and set off that chain reaction. So it is doable. Yeah.
Well, you're right. And North Korea, it really does seem, I get that sort of 1940s vibe from them in terms of technological advancement. But who knows? Maybe they're getting stuff from China who are absolutely on the cutting edge.
Yeah. Hey, can I talk about the Olympics real quick?
Sure.
Yeah, I was going to say, what's up with everybody being all gracious toward this lady and thinking she's just this wonderful princess? I mean, aren't they running gulags there?
So, yeah, I mean, what happens is that the TV airheads know nothing, right? So then, you know, they're perfectly happy to completely demonize North Korea all day, right? But then they see an actual North Korean and wowee, she looks just like a human, like in my neighborhood or something. And so then they're completely blown away. Wow, she's even pretty and has a little bit of style or whatever. And so then now all of a sudden it's like we're on an episode of, you know, whatever crap people watch. I don't know. The one where they get married or
TMZ or whatever.
Yeah. It's all now we're talking about the most surface level thing. So then the right wing reaction is, don't you know she's a monster? And then everyone who's not either a North Korea loving red, although even Reds I don't think necessarily love North Korea. But everybody who's not a CNN, you know, brainless hairdo says, oh my God, how can you talk about the North Koreans as though they're not demons? When the whole point is, it's a communist dictatorship. Yeah, that's why we should be engaging with them. That's why we should be flattering the sister of the dictator. That's why we should be sending all of our people over there. It doesn't mean ignore what's wrong with the country. That's saying, well, what are you going to do? It's been a communist dictatorship for now 25 years after the fall of the Soviet Union, 40 years since the Chinese gave up communism. I mean, they still have a Communist Party dictatorship, but frankly, it's a fascist country. It's a very, you know, authoritarian capitalist country, China now. There's still a communist dictatorship in North Korea. And
it's weird, isn't it? Why don't they let go? I mean, the sons and the family don't really come back. How can you be a brother of someone like in the family, within the family, and come back and say, like, wouldn't you think, guys, can we just loosen up a little bit? What? I mean,
look, people say about Richard Nixon that he was the worst son of a bitch ever to be the president of the United States, and he opened up China. Because he went over there and he shook hands with Mao Zedong, who was literally, I mean, if we're going by numbers, the worst person who ever lived, who inflicted a famine on his own country that killed 40 million people, okay? He was as bad as Stalin plus. And Nixon did the right thing by going over there, shaking hands, and saying, let's have an open relationship, open up trade, open up.
Hey guys, I think that Scott is on mute. Josh, are you there?
Yeah. I was just.
So we had a silent moment. I actually think I may have done that. Scott, if you could just hit unmute. Sorry, I was looking forward to that. Continue.
Yeah,
now
so
we can hear you.
Yeah. 40 million people.
The best thing that ever happened to China was the Americans making friends with them and sending Milton Friedman over there and encouraging them to figure out and understand why markets work. You need prices to figure out how to distribute goods and services. Your commissars don't know what to do. Prices will tell you the clues that you need to know to have a civilization here. And it worked. And it saved them. So right now, you know, there was a clip when Dennis Rodman went to North Korea and was palling around with Kim Jong-un. And he came back, and on one of these talk shows, they said, oh my God, Kim Jong-un has prison camps with hundreds of thousands of people in them, with 200,000 people in them. And Dennis Rodman says America has prisons with 2 million people in them.
Yeah.
So what is your point? The American government has murdered 2 million people in the last 15 years, or gotten them killed. Probably, you know, literally killed a quarter of those. But North Korea is the tyranny?
Yeah.
You know, it's completely ridiculous to say that somehow, look at what happened in 2003. Iraq. which America had blockaded and bombed for 12 years straight. They hadn't, as Ron Paul said, they hadn't shot down a single one of our planes when our planes were flying combat sorties over their country for a dozen years running. They hadn't been able to shoot down a single one of our planes. They had no weapons, no army. They were decimated. Saddam Hussein controlled Baghdad, Fallujah, Tikrit, maybe Mosul. He didn't control Iraqi Kurdistan. He didn't even really have all the way control down in Basra in the south of the country. And George Bush and Dick Cheney said, you know what about Saddam Hussein, though, is he's so evil that means we can't talk to him. Right? Like, pretend it was true Saddam was holding some mustard gas. We can't negotiate with him about that.
Yeah.
Suppose it's true that Saddam had, given some money to Osama bin Laden. None of these things are true. But pretend it was true. Then what? We can't negotiate about that? We have to have a war? We have to invade Iraq? And the answer was, because you see, like David Koresh, the guy's so damn insane. And so you can't talk to him, even though here's footage of Donald Rumsfeld himself literally shaking hands with the guy, making a deal to provide him with chemical weapons back in the 1980s, in 1983. Never even mind that.
David Koresh and even all these
evil, we just can't negotiate. There's nothing to talk about because they're so evil and he's so crazy. And the fact of the matter is, the more crazy and the more evil Kim Jong-un is, the more we ought to send Dennis Rodman and the Harlem Globetrotters and the Symphony Orchestra and Pepsi and whatever non-governmental anything, any part of our society positive that we can send to go over there to trade, to open up relations, to be friends. That's all to the good.
I totally agree.
All that knee-jerk demonization. Yeah, of course it's a hellhole country.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. A lot of places are hellhole countries. But is it believable, thinking back to 2002 and 2003, is it believable that poor America was just helpless when it came to Iraq? We just had no other options but to invade that country. I mean, isn't that obviously crazy? And how did they do it? They did it by just saying, oh, Saddam's so evil, which was true. He was an absolute brutal dictator. But that didn't mean that we had to overthrow him. That didn't mean that all of the horrible things about him weren't negotiable. And in fact, we know now on the record that they were. That he had offered to negotiate on every single thing.
All over the world, but they aren't in control of oil and another bunch of resources.
I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
There's plenty of dictators around the world that are just not in control of large resources, so they don't get taken out, I guess.
Yeah, well, that was a big part of it. Was and in fact, they talk about the power of rising China now that we're all supposed to be so afraid of. But look at where America blew our entire wad, trying to control the oil resources in Mesopotamia to keep them out of China's hands. So that in the event of a war with China, we'd be able to turn off their oil resources. Well, we wasted far more of our wealth and position, even from the empire's point of view here. The Americans wasted far more of their wealth and power and position in the world by trying to dominate Iraq than if they had stayed the hell out. And they wouldn't have any trouble shutting off the Persian Gulf anyway. You don't need a single soldier. All you need is the Navy for that anyway, assuming the propriety of such a thing. But I'm just saying.
So
let me ask something. So, I mean, these steps seem so obvious to regular sane people. And yet for years and years and years and years, the war machine just marches on unfettered. What is the best course of action that we can do? Is that public pushback really our best weapon? Is there anything else that we can do to maybe make our government stop being psycho and killing everybody?
Yeah, I don't really know. I mean, honestly, it's the best racket that anybody ever came up with. And the American taxpayer, and for that matter, the Federal Reserve System and the ability of Congress to go into debt, trillions of dollars the way that they do, it's the best racket ever. If you invest just a few $1 million to bribe a congressman, to bribe a Navy officer, to even just to not even really bribe them illegally, but just take them out for steak dinners and make a nice impression, you can get billions of dollars for your company in return for that. And so, the way the game is played, I don't know how to undo it. I think the only way to undo it would be for the now generation of combat veterans who have gone to Iraq and Afghanistan, et cetera, to come home and really create groups of preferably right-leaning combat veterans saying, we hate the war, we don't believe in the war anymore, and we're mad as hell that the civilians and the officers continue to sacrifice enlisted lives on what we know is a mission that cannot be accomplished. And to really attack the right from the right from a pro-American point of view, from, as David Hackworth used to do, always protecting, in the name of protecting the enlisted man from his officers and from these, think tank idiots who would lie them into war and push them into these ridiculous policies for their, ideological doctrines and their loyalties to their foreign powers, etc.
What do you think the biggest con is around North Korea? What do you think the biggest lie is that we're being told to push us towards war? That we can, be exposed.
Yeah, that evil amounts to irrationality. In fact, this is exact quotes. It could come straight from Dick Cheney, but it's Rex Tillerson and Donald Trump. In his State of the Union address, Donald Trump said, "Look, all you need to know about North Korea's goals in the world, or what their foreign policy is, or what they intend, is just to look at their domestic policy and look at just how evil they are at home." But that just doesn't follow at all. I mean, in fact, how evil they are at home is what limits their ability to project power anywhere, right? Their entire gross domestic product is nothing, right? It's less than half of Alabama or something. It's nothing. And so, it's a lie, right? That was your question, right? It's absolutely false. It's absolutely false that, this guy's about to, suicide bomb his whole country so he can get 72 virgins in heaven or some kind of thing. The same lie that they tell about terrorists. This guy, and it's a cliche. Many critics keep saying it, like Doug Bandow and others. This guy clearly wants to die of old age, the way his grandfather and his father did. He wants to be a dictator. He wants to live just like Saddam Hussein, right? Just like the Ayatollahs in Iran. They all want to live to a ripe old age. They don't want to start a war. Anytime somebody's telling you that the leaders of a foreign country are so irrational and so evil that we can't talk to them, it's because the Americans talking to you are in on a premeditated murder plot to start an aggressive war, which is what they always do. And I always bring up David Koresh because it's exactly what they did to David Koresh. They said he's too irrational, so there's no point in talking to him. He's bad to his own people, and we just can't allow that to continue. And he has illegal weapons, which means he's a threat to his neighbors. Now you're supposed to believe that the Branch Davidians are going to march on downtown Waco and seize the courthouse or something, right? And so we have no choice but to send in the Delta Force and kill him. And that's the exact same thing they did to Saddam Hussein in 2003. He's bad to his own people. He's got illegal weapons, and he's too irrational, too evil to deal with. And so we only have one choice: aggressive war. And, I'm sorry, there's just not. If you want to criticize Ayman al-Zawahiri, I guess, along those lines, that he would get, all of his own people killed in order to drag us down, I guess that makes sense. But Korea, Iran, Iraq, Hezbollah, or any of these, they've betrayed no interest whatsoever in dying in order just to bloody our nose on the way down. It's just completely ridiculous.
I mean, sorry, Tatiana.
Well, no, I mean, I think that humanization is really something that is missing from I don't even know. I don't even think people really think about it anymore. They just think, oh, there's nuclear war coming. What's on TV? But if you think about it, I don't know. I was pretty annoyed with everybody gushing all over that Korean lady. But I don't know. I mean, I think seeing these people and trying to extend the olive branch and trying to approach it from a little bit of a different perspective, I think is very helpful.
It's diplomacy, right? So feelings don't matter. When the Turks shot down that Russian jet a couple of years ago, hell, when the Americans bombed those Russian contractors in Syria, should they have gone rah and wanted to fight about it, or should they have smiled and said, well, accidents happen? Right now, personal feelings aside, we want to ratchet up tensions with Russia in terms of actual combat on the ground in Syria, or maybe everybody should just cool out a little bit, starting with what we say to each other. So, do
you think that Trump is that, he seems pretty warmongerish? I mean, he's not really doing anything, but I don't know. What's your thought on that?
Yeah, no, he's horrible on everything. The one thing
how you really feel.
He was reluctant to stay in Afghanistan, but they rolled right over him on that. He's horrible on Iran. I don't know if he really would get us into a war with Iran, but he might. We'll see what happens with the perfectly good nuclear deal. It's a great deal. I don't care what he says. But yeah, he could turn that into a real conflict. He's staying in Syria, which, you know, as I said, just got us into actual firefight with Russians on the ground there last week, and puts us at odds with our NATO allies, the Turks, and all of this, and all to fight to limit Iranian influence and Hezbollah influence, even though they never really did anything to us. You know, people, when they demonize Iran, they have to, one, either just lie about their nuclear weapons, or two, they'll cite the Beirut bombing, the barracks bombing of 1983, which, you know what, Iran was at least backed the group that did that, the Amal militia, and maybe the orders even came from the old dead Ayatollah. But seriously, you got to go back to 1983, and then the rest of what they have is just lies, right? The Argentina, the Jewish Community Center bombing of 1994, that was right-wing Jew-hating Nazis inside the Argentine police that did that. That wasn't Hezbollah that did that. You know, the fact that they got to reach back to, 20 years ago, 25 years ago, and cite examples of things that aren't even real in order to try to pretend that the Shia are the American people's enemies here, when it was Al-Qaeda that knocked our towers down. And now they're mad at Iran because Iran inherited half of Iraq after America's war there in 2003 through 10. Well, tough. You know, they shouldn't have launched an aggressive war based on lies then.
Well, it's a big topic, and geez, I'd love to continue, because I mean, as depressing it is, I think it's super important to expose some of these lies, and to be able to say to people, hey, step back a bit. Like, exactly what you said. It's rational. It's irrational to think that these people are just gonna want to blow themselves up. Generally people in power, people that live pretty well, they don't want to. But
anyway, so sorry guys, I know we're kind of in the thick of it, but we've got to wrap it up because we've got Kitty coming up. But in the meantime, Scott, thank you so much for joining us. So we'd love to have you back on another time. Where can people catch up with you? I know that some of this information is a little overwhelming. I just wanted to bring it up, guys. If what Scott's saying, you don't understand everything, if you keep listening to his show, you eventually will sort of catch on. I know it's a little bit hard to keep up with all the different places where we're, sending troops, but he'll help you keep track of things. And thank you for all your hard work. Scott, where can people catch up with you?
Cool. Well, thanks very much, Tatiana, for having me, all of y'all. And so I'm at antiwar.com. The Libertarian Institute, that's me and Sheldon Richman and Jerry LaBelle run the Libertarian Institute at libertarianinstitute.org. I wrote a book called Fool's Errand. I'm constantly complaining all day long on Twitter at Scott Horton Show. Oh, and actually, I just got the full interview archive finally posted, all up on YouTube. 4,600 something interviews there, going back to 2003 at youtube.com/Scott Horton Show.
Wow, awesome. Well, that sounds like quite the resource. So thank you again. And and
the audiobook of Fool's Errand, which is read by me, is coming out any minute now or any day now.
Oh, that's good. Okay. That's going to be
Where's that? Amazon?
Well, it's on Amazon and Audible and iTunes and all that when it comes out, but you can just go to foolserrand.us and that'll have all the info for you.
Very cool. All right, I'm going to your Twitter right now, and I'm going to retweet your Fool's Errand book so people can sort of look on my Queen Tatiana Twitter feed and they'll be able to see it there.
Cool.
Awesome.
Thanks for having me. I'll let you go. I know I'm overtime here.
No, it was a good / disturbingly miserable time. Thank you for joining us.
All right, thanks, guys. Have a good one.
Awesome. Thank you. Great. So we're going to jump right in here. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Tatiana Show. This is a continuation of a previous episode, but it's all its own episode on its own. I don't think that made sense. But we did lose a Josh, and we did gain a Kat. So, Kat, Murti, thank you so much for joining me on the Tatiana Show again.
Thanks for having me back.
Awesome. So we've got a lot of good stuff that we could talk about today. I know that you've been working on a number of different kinds of projects, and you've got, of course, the Students for Sensible Drug Policy event coming up. What is it, March 3rd through the 5th?
2nd through 5th, yeah.
2nd through the 5th. So let's open up with that, because people are planning out their months. They're wondering where to go if they want to learn about the drug war, and they got to put it on their schedule. So what's the scoop for this event?
Yeah.
Oh, you just cut out. Look at that. Isn't Google Hangouts lovely?
20th year, actually, in our 20th year empowering student activists to end the war on drugs. And we're about to have our big international conference in Baltimore, Maryland in less than 2 weeks. I can't believe it's coming up so soon. I'm super excited. SSDP is now in, I believe, 27 countries, including the United States. And we will actually have chapter members coming out from, I think, 26 of those countries. And we would have had even more, except unfortunately, of course, the government got in trouble, really shut down some of our plans, denying visas for some of our activists. We've had problems with this in the past, but overall, this is going to be it's going to be probably one of the biggest, if not the biggest, gatherings of young people who are working to end the war on drugs around the world. Yeah, it's going to be fantastic.
Who is the main perpetrator of the war on drugs? Because I assume that it's the U.S. because we love to throw people in jail and harass everyone. Mm-hmm. So I'm sure that there's other countries with bad drug policies. But when you say the war on drugs, I mean, is that really a U.S. institution? I mean, are we number one? In that?
Well, it's a little bit hard to say that. I mean, certainly the United States has put massive pressure on countries around the world to adopt anti-freedom laws, basically, around drug policy. And the United States, of course, as with other things, does go around the world bombing countries, cutting funding, putting a lot of pressure in order to block more libertarian views on drug policy. On the other hand, within the U.S., we've seen a lot of wins for drug policy in recent years. And if you compare that to some place like, for instance, the Philippines, where we do have a chapter, we have some folks coming out from that chapter to this conference. They have Rodrigo Duterte, who's their president and who ran on a platform that he would kill at least 10,000 drug users within his first year. And he's killed thousands of people. These are extrajudicial killings.
How is this possible? Why isn't the international community saying, hold your horses?
Right. Why don't you hear more about this? Yeah, it's extremely concerning to me. I mean, there is some news about it, but unfortunately, very few people are discussing this. It's a huge problem. We have all sorts of other countries around the world where, something as simple as drug possession, small minor amounts of drug possession carry a death penalty. Yes, we are winning in a real way. We are winning this war on people, because that's what the war on drugs really is. It's a war on people, and we're winning it for people, but we're so actually winning.
I feel like there's just a lot of bad news in the world. What the hell are we supposed to do with all this? I mean, look, you got people in North Korea, they're getting killed. You got people in Syria and all of Yemen and all of the Middle East, they're all screwed. You've got, and now on top of that, you've got this worldwide issue. What's some of the progress that you've seen in the past few years? And what do you see that trajectory looking like other than long and torturous?
Absolutely. I think that the trajectory actually around the world is a positive one. We're all coming from different places, obviously, but I mean, if you just look at the United States, you get drug warriors like Jeff Sessions, who are in power, saying that there's no such thing as a good drug user, who said that his one problem with the KKK was that he found out some of them smoked marijuana.
That seems like something to get really upset about. Right. I'm glad that he focused on that.
That's the objectionable part of the KKK, right? So of course we have problems with that, but then you also have to look at what he's reacting to. He's reacting to the fact that states are using federalism to respect the will of the people. Close to 70% of Americans want to see legal marijuana in this country, and the vast majority of states now have either medical or recreational in some form, and that momentum's going to continue. And I think that we're also starting to see a lot more interest in liberalizing other areas of drug policy, whether it's drug research, a lot of interest on research into some of the stuff that's psychedelics like MDMA or psychedelic mushroom psilocybin could do for people's health, where that is research that has been blocked by the government for a very long time. And so we're starting to see some movement there. We're seeing a lot of great harm reduction measures coming up. And of course, there are countries like Portugal, Canada, Ireland. SSDP Ireland has led some really incredible measures around harm reduction happening there. We're not seeing that as much in the United States, where unfortunately there's still this sort of stigma and this feeling that drug users should be punished for their use with death, right? You have people like Governor LePage of Maine, who is, of course, in one of the states that's really being targeted by the so-called opioid crisis. And I'd like to touch on what that actually is in a second here. But his response to it is to block measures that have been shown to prevent opioid deaths, because he thinks that it would discourage people enough from using drugs if they're not just dying. And so, you definitely have that kind of mentality to fight against. And at the same time, I mentioned the opioid crisis beforehand, and the opioid crisis is a rather funny sort of, not really funny, I don't want to use that word, but it's a rather strange sort of media phenomenon more than anything else. For one thing, opioid deaths are actually down now in this decade compared to many previous decades. What has shifted a lot is who is dying as a result of opioid overdoses. And basically, it's moving more to like white suburban neighborhoods. And that's kind of where this crisis rhetoric came from, even though overall deaths were down. But then that resulted in this mass panic and all of these things like prescription pill restrictions. So doctors are being pressured not to prescribe pain medication to their patients who need it. Those kinds of things. And that has directly correlated with then an actual rise in deaths, as folks who are in pain are not able to get medication and start looking to the black market for ways around that. And we've seen a lot of tampered drugs coming into the market as the other so-called fix that our government has tried to push for the opioid crisis has been restricting supply. And of course, this hasn't actually done anything to restrict demand. So what you're seeing is more and more people taking drugs that aren't safe, that aren't what they think they are, and then they die. And we're blocking access to things like Narcan. We're blocking access to things like needle exchange. We're creating situations where people can't go and ask for help because they're facing either going to prison, having their children taken away, that kind of thing. We're creating this problem. So, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that there's a lot of wins. There's a lot of things to be excited for. And there's a lot of deeply concerning issues that are just really pushing this drug war rhetoric.
But to me, it seems pretty logical to say, okay, well, you've got all these people on an opioid crisis. You got to stop prescribing the opioids, right? I mean, that seems like, well, maybe stop giving them the drugs. But what would be the solution, right? I mean, if people are saying, I want these drugs, I need them, and some people have legitimate pain, some people are addicts, how do you mitigate that?
Absolutely. I think that the number one thing you need to do is trust doctors. I think that a lot of the problems have come from this idea that doctors don't know what they're doing, and politicians have a better understanding of how to manage pain and how to prescribe medicine. And that's never worked in our history. It's always caused problems. Doctors have a better idea of that individual patient that they work with. So a lot of times we're seeing situations where someone actually does legitimately have chronic pain issues. And when you cut down their access, they're no longer in pain. They're in a massive amount of pain, and they don't have a safe way to get access to the medicine that they need. So they start turning to the black market. So that's kind of a big problem here. And it also, doctors are very concerned that they're going to be targeted. They're going to be seen as a pill mill doctor. They're going to be rated. And so they're actually being much more careful about prescribing. So they're sort of under prescribing at this point. Dr. Jeffrey Singer, who's with the Cato Institute, writes about this a lot. It's very interesting. But then the other problem here is that, yes, of course you have people who are addicts, people who well, I don't want to say they are addicts. It's not who they are as a person, but they have drug abuse problems related to opioids or other such drugs. And you have the same issue. Prohibition doesn't actually work. We've had prohibitionist policies in this country for over 100 years now, starting with the Harrison Tax Act of 1914. And, you know, at no point has drug use gone down. If anything, it's gone up, and the problems surrounding drug use have gone up. The few things that we have seen that have led to fewer problems associated with drug use have to do with liberalizing drug access. Portugal was facing a crisis in the 1990s where they were seeing more and more drug overdose deaths, more and more drug abuse problems, that kind of thing. And they took a very radical position at that time where they essentially not quite legalized, but decriminalized all drugs and created a drug court system, which is actually not the same as the drug court system that you're seeing here in the US. It's a voluntary drug court system where people who got caught with drugs repeatedly would come in and be asked, hi, do you have a problem? Do you want to discuss this? So it's not an issue where they're being sent to treatment because otherwise they're going to prison, which is why you see, for instance, a lot of people going to treatment through drug courts for things like they smoked marijuana once in the US. This is very different. And they immediately saw not just a decrease in overdose deaths, a decrease in other health concerns related to problematic drug use, but they also saw a decrease in drug use and the age of first drug use going up and all of these kinds of things. And so the science is out there. Portugal's not the only country where we've seen this. We've seen this in the Netherlands. We've seen other examples of this on a more local basis where it's pretty clear that you don't have to support drug use. You can be opposed to drug use. You can think that drug use is a bad idea and still understand that the war on drugs makes all the problems associated with drug use so much worse.
Yeah, I mean, amen. Yeah. That was a whole lot of really, really useful information. I don't know why more people aren't behind this. So many millions of people are locked up in the US. I was just with Lynn Ulbricht down in Dallas, and we met this guy, Gideon. I'm going to be hearing from him, but his focus with his activism around the drug war is going to be on nonviolent drug offenders with life sentences. And it was like really crazy. Sorry, there's a lot of light in the room. I think it was like 17,000 people or something are on death row, or I mean, basically have like life imprisonment for all nonviolent stuff. And that's bananas. I mean, I don't know. I feel like so many people do drugs. And also you watch drugs on TV all the time. Like even family shows. I remember there was this show that I really liked called Parenthood. It was really kind of granola, but it was really sweet and sort of sincere as well. And there, you know, sometimes the family would smoke a joint. So funny. And it's like, it's not funny in the hood. It's not funny if you get arrested with that joint. But culturally, it's so acceptable.
Culturally, it's fine, except for the moment that the cops show up. And, you know, I think that we can even take this a step further in places where where cannabis has been legalized, like Colorado. It wasn't actually legalized retroactively. So all of those folks who have decades-long sentences for crimes that happened. I mean, if you got arrested the day before it was legalized, right, you're still going to jail, right? And that's a huge problem. And these are people that we're overlooking. And, you know, the industry as well, the cannabis industry, as it's continued to develop, unfortunately, a lot of the trade-offs that are being made are agreements with local politicians to do things like, say, ban people who have prior cannabis convictions from being involved in the business. I mean, so for instance, here in Washington, D.C., where we do have recreational, you can see the poster behind me, but we don't have recreational sales here. We kind of have a weird patchwork system, but we do have a medical system. And for the medical grows, people who have been involved in growing cannabis in the DC area for decades are not allowed legally to work in these grows. Yeah, so the people who are actually getting the permits, who are able to start it, who are able to make the money off of it, are contracting with these individuals for a small amount of money on a consultant basis, because they're the people who have the actual knowledge, who know how to do this, but the government is keeping them out of that market. It's just, it's upsetting to see the way
this whole
in which,
show makes me hate government. Government just
funny
sucks
how that
so
works,
bad,
right?
They're so bad at everything. It's just ridiculous. Like listening to everything that Scott was just saying, and the need for the open mesh network stuff, like Micha was saying, and now this. I mean, it's like so blatantly obvious that they're so bad at everything except for sucking. I know it's like a very simplified way of saying it, but it's just appalling that this goes on. I mean,
absolutely. I mean, I think it all the time. There is no way that you can look at the war on drugs, just really accurately look at the war on drugs, look at the results, and say, this is a war that is meant to prohibit people from taking drugs and that is meant to reduce the harms of drugs. Because on every measure, it makes everything related to drugs so much more dangerous, so much more violent, and so much more harmful.
Yeah, I mean, and also think about all the wasted time and effort there is trying to lobby, trying to fight, trying to go against the system. It's so overwhelming. But this isn't. Oh, I mean, look, once I went into that prison and I visited Ross in there, I'm never going to forget that. I'm never going to forget about Ross. We're going to get him out and hopefully use that as a galvanizing moment to help liberate all these other people that maybe don't have someone as eloquent as Lynn Ulbricht to go around the country and sort of advocate for them. I know if people have been following attention to that, they actually just put in a petition to be hopefully heard by the Supreme Court. Right. And that's going to be something that potentially can set a lot of precedent if it's selected. So we're going to keep our fingers crossed.
Ross's case is so heartbreaking, but it's also so important because if the Supreme Court does hear his case, there's a lot of questions in there that'll totally change how the drug war is being prosecuted online, especially, you know, the Silk Road and other similar sites where people are increasingly purchasing drugs in these online marketplaces, and there's just really not a whole lot of precedent. And what precedent there is, you have far fewer rights than you have offline, and so this is a huge issue.
Well, it's bananas. And then listen to this. So Lynn did a talk, and I feel really versed in everything because I've been sort of so closely involved with the family and stuff. But one of the things that she told me was the second Silk Road operator, the founder of Silk Road 2.0. Do you know how many days he served in prison?
Not many. Definitely less than double life. 16
days. I mean, how in the world can Ross Ulbricht be given double life plus 40 years, and then the second guy that they were trying to scare him away from doing it gets 16 days? It's like, well, look, that's a great deal. You could build a drug empire and you get 16 days of, self-reflection, and you go home. I mean, it's the travesty of justice.
Those kinds of sentencing disparities, that's actually part and parcel of the drug war. You see over and over again, two people who were charged with and prosecuted for the exact same crime in the exact same place. And for whatever reason, perhaps it was because one got more media attention, one was a little bit more sexy for the cameras. Perhaps a lot of times it's related to race or socioeconomic background or something like that. See vast differences in sentences where somebody might be going home with community service and someone else is getting a life sentence for essentially the same crime.
That's just unbelievable.
Yeah. What happened to rule of law, right? Rule of law, federalism, all of these things that supposedly the Republican Party is so big on when it comes to the drug war, unfortunately. And there are exceptions, of course, but unfortunately, the vast majority of them throw them right out the window.
It's unreal. I think it's just overwhelming, but I appreciate all the work that you're doing, and people can go to that conference. You don't have to be a student in order to go, right?
No,
if people are in the Baltimore area,
not at all. Anyone in the Baltimore area, DC area, it's going to be great. It's It's Friday, Saturday, Sunday. We're going to have programming throughout the day. I'll be moderating a debate on the role of capitalism in the drug war. I think that'll be really interesting. On the pro-capitalism side, it's going to be Nick Gillespie from Reason and Clark O'Neely from Cato, formerly from IJ. So that's some folks that you guys know. I'll be speaking on a panel there about how people from across the political spectrum are working together on this. That's just what I'm working on. There's a ton of programming, different folks from around the world sharing some of the work that they're doing in their countries, their regions. And it's open to the public. You can just go to ssdp.org and check out SSDP 2018, the conference, register for a ticket. There's even one-day passes, so you could just come in for one day and see what's going on.
Very cool. I like it. I don't know if I can make it. I'd love to pop down for a day if I can.
Yeah,
we'll
would
see.
Love to have you. Yeah, we'll have another conversation after that.
That sounds good. So I know that we don't have like that much time today for the show, but I did want to touch on something that I had seen online, because you are one of the co-founders of Feminists for Liberty, yes. Right? Yes. And so you went to the Women's March.
Yeah. So it was great.
I consider myself a feminist, but I will be honest and find a lot of feminists these days to be annoying and sort of not really focusing on what I consider to be much more important issues. People are getting distracted with some side stuff. So that made me a little bit averse to going to the Women's March. I'm like, oh God, listen to these whiners. There's real problems in the world. So what happened when you went? Who did you go with? Like, what was your experience like? And were people open-minded?
Yeah.
To a little bit more of a libertarian type feminist.
I wasn't sure entirely what to expect. I wasn't able to go last year because I was out of the country at the time. But this year I ended up going with Feminists for Liberty, which I'm co-founder of, and the Ladies of Liberty Alliance, which I'm very involved in. I'm the comms director for that organization. We sort of joined forces together.
Nice.
Yeah. And so we had a bunch of folks come out, probably from our two groups, maybe about 20 people of, all genders came out, brought some signs. It was great. We had stuff like libertarianism is consent culture and, F4L's slogan, anti-sexism, anti-statism, pro-markets, pro-choice. We had some slogans from the suffragette era. We were, I dressed, and several of the other ladies in our group dressed like suffragettes, but wore libertarian sashes instead of the suffragette sash. Yeah. And it turned out really well. We had all sorts of folks coming up to us. A lot of times, we did get folks who were like, hey, we saw your libertarian signs and we thought that you were coming out to hassle us, because a lot of the libertarians we talk to on our campuses or where we live or whatever like that have these very traditional gender role ideas and build themselves as anti-feminists. And so it's really interesting they're coming from this. And so a ton of people that we got a chance to talk to about how the state has always been the biggest perpetrator of gender inequality, gender violence in history, both in America and around the world, and how the state is continuing to promote sexism. And I think that there's a really good reception. A lot of people really interested in the ideas. We did manage to get some media out of that as well, which is nice. It's always good to bring that libertarian feminist message out there to the media. I think that a lot of times when people hear about libertarianism in the media, they kind of hear it as this like old white man's view, or right, it's only for old rich white men and no one else ever. Definitely not someone like me, right? Mm-hmm. Or alternately, when they hear about feminism, it's oftentimes equated with like, you vote Democrat and you're a democratic socialist. It's like, okay, well, I'm neither. So I still believe that people of all genders, all sexes are equal and should be treated equally under the law and otherwise. So it's nice to kind of challenge those views in a sort of friendly environment where, you know, I didn't know how friendly it was going to be, but certainly a lot of people out there, they just want to talk, they want to learn, they want to listen. And that's what we were there for as well. So that was really cool.
Wow. All right. Awesome. So there's so much there. What do you think about the identity politics? Like, I think a lot of people really like to see themselves as victims. That kind of gives them like that rallying power. But even though I think that there's times where as women, we do get the short end of the stick, we're victimized, blah, blah. I think what I like about like a little bit more of a libertarian leaning feminism is the ability to sort of kind of take control and sort of actively own your stuff, right? And and also to stop being a victim and say, okay, well, maybe this thing sucked, but let's keep moving. What do you think? Were people kind of receptive? Were they able to sort of give up that mantle of I've been the victim, or were they sort of open to that kind of a discussion?
Well, I think that it's valuable to understand ways in which the state and other powers have hurt people. I mean, I think that if you totally gloss over that and pretend that it didn't happen or that it's not happening, you know, you can't fix anything, you can't create any change. But that said, that's not really where we want to stop. I mean, it's not enough to say, hey, here are some problems. We want to go out there and fix it. And we don't want someone else fixing it. We don't need the state coming in and telling us how they're going to equalize things for us. We just need them to get out of the way so that we can do things for ourselves. And yeah, I think that there are a lot of people who are increasingly interested in hearing that message.
What about within our own community? So I find that it's very nice to say, oh, we're libertarians and we'll shun you if you're bad and blah, blah. But as any woman in the libertarian movement knows, there's a lot of pigs out there and there's a lot of pigs in power. And I mean, maybe that's not nice to call them that, but I mean, it's truth, right? There's a lot of creepy dudes and they sort of get away with it. And yet within our own movement, I'm not really sure what's been done in order to protect other women from this and just sort of have our own like Weinstein moment. And to be honest, I really think that there are some people that are pretty darn bad out there. And then you've got other, you know, large conferences where they have a whole bunch of dudes speaking. And they've got someone like, you know, Jeff Berwick, who's like a total scumbag, is groping chicks. He's for some reason respected, but then you see the lineup at a certain very, very large freedom-based conference. And there's, you know, 7 women and then like 700 dudes. Now, I don't think that we should be putting women on these panels because they're women and, you know,
right.
Oh, the vagina card. But I know a lot of really amazing women that are bringing something unique to the conversation and their voices are never included. So what's been your experience with trying to sort of push the ball forward within our own community?
Absolutely. There's a lot to unpack from that statement. And I think it's also important. I want to start with the idea that fundamentally sexism does not belong to any one aspect of the political spectrum. It's across that spectrum. There's people with this problem across that spectrum. And I think that for the vast majority of human history, it's been something that if it wasn't outrightly rewarded, it was at the very least ignored, excused, etc. And I think that we're increasingly getting to that point. And I think that things like the Me Too movement, Weinstein, et cetera, are really pushing this forward. But yeah, absolutely. There's still a lot of problems. There's still creepers. There's still people who think that they can get away with a lot of different things because they've reached this notoriety and acclaim for other issues that they've worked on. And yeah, I think that there's a few different things that we can talk about here. One is the fact that, like, yes, we are libertarians. We do believe in freedom of association, and we need to be active about that. When we see people who are causing problems, we need to be much more willing to call them out and stop inviting them. Stop making them.
But that guy was nice to me. I mean, right. Didn't you ever hear that before? Like, oh, I know. I heard he groped that girl, but like, he's always been nice to me. So, you know, I mean, that kind of thing really gets me burned up because it's like, oh, well, he's a rape, but hey, he didn't rape me, so it's totally fine. I mean, what kind of
clearly it's fine, and you know, and that happens all the time. I mean, you know, you have the same thing with Senator Franken, for instance. All of these folks saying, Oh, well, it was a problem when we were talking about Republicans, but, you know, Senator Franklin's always been great to me, so I don't see why he's an issue, right?
Oh
and so,
gosh.
like, we get the exact same problem. You know, there's this feeling of, you know, why is this person criticizing this person in my movement? Yeah, it might be a problem, but you're making our whole movement look bad, and therefore you're the enemy, not the person who's creating the problem. And I think that that's unfortunately a reaction we've seen a lot of times, where someone gets called out for being a sexual harasser, for being a sexual abuser, for something like that. And then the immediate turnaround reaction is, what's wrong with these women? Why weren't these women doing more to stop him? And then all of the criticism is around women who were tangentially involved, who were victims, who were not at all involved and knew nothing of what was happening, and very quickly gets pulled away from the person who's caused the obvious problem. And so I think that's something that needs to change in our society overall. That's not just a libertarian problem. That's a problem in our society. And I think we're increasingly getting to that point where that is changing. But there's so much more work to do. And a big part of that is just slowly realizing, hey, people like this, there are so many better people who are doing work in this area. We don't have to keep recognizing them and calling them out and making them the stars of our movement when we know that they have these problematic issues. And understanding that when we create situations where people like that are centered in our movement, we chase away other amazing, talented people who wouldn't have caused the same problems because they don't want to be associated with those people. And so we sort of create this like catch-22 problem. So it's a big reversal. It's a big stepping out of that. It's also, I think, a role for good guys, honestly, good guys in the movement. There's a lot of really great libertarian men out there. And I think that, you know, women can't do it themselves. They need to step up and they need to say, hey, I heard that joke you made. It wasn't really funny. I'm just calling you out on that because we're friends. Like, don't say stuff like that. Or, hey, I heard you made that comment. And I think that as people in credit start doing that, you're going to see more and more really highly qualified women. There are a lot of qualified women in our movement. You see more and more, see amazing people, and you're going to see that sort of permeate throughout. But definitely a grassroots problem and one that we can fix.
Excellent. Well, on that somewhat more optimistic note, I think we can give it a wrap. And one more time, Kat, thank you so much for joining us. I like all your insights. I think that the second question is a little bit longer, and I'd love to delve into it more. Maybe we'll get some other ladies and a couple men representing the community to discuss it. So one more time, give us a plug, and then we're going to wrap the show.
Awesome. Well, thanks again. I'm Kat Murti. You can find me on Twitter or Facebook. It's just Kat Murti, Kat with a K. And you can also find SSDP at SSDP, that's Students for Sensible Drug Policy. Come to our conference on March 2nd here in Baltimore and find Feminists for Liberty again on Twitter as @FeministLiberty or on Facebook. And you can always catch me on the second Friday of every month. I'm on the morning show with Mr. O on WBAI Radio. My segment is We Should All Be Libertarian Feminists.
Excellent. Thank you so much for joining us, and I hope to see you in a couple weeks.
Thank you. Great
Thanks.
talking to you.
Take
Bye.
care. Bye, everybody. We'll see you next week. Ciao, ciao.